Welcome to Musings from Arledge Solo Edition. I've got a couple of topics to hit today. I want to start, sort of with an apology, although I'm not really sorry. I said a few weeks ago that I was going to go through the entire schedule and team by team do some sort of season preview. I've decided I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do it because I don't want to, because you probably don't want me to. The truth is, this is a 5-game season. It's a 5-game season. I'm not going to talk about the other teams. Nobody wants to hear me talk about Arizona State or Arizona. Nobody wants to hear about Cal. Those games don't matter. Doesn't mean that USC couldn't be upset in one of those games. It's possible. Upsets happen in college football. But it's not going to happen. This is a 5-game schedule. So I'm going to focus only on those 5 teams. And I'm going to start with the Utah Utes today. I also, at the end, have some comments on recruiting, so stick around for that. All right, let's talk about the Utes. The truth is, I actually like Utah, and I respect Utah. I respect Kyle Whittingham. This is a program that does things the right way. Whittingham is fantastic at finding under-the-radar recruits and developing guys. The Utah program is tough. They're disciplined. They run the ball. They stop the run. They play football the way it's supposed to be played. I don't have anything bad to say about the program. They're good, and they're going to be good again this year. I don't know if Cam Rising's going to be 100%. It's a pretty tall order to come back from an ACL injury that you suffer on, January 1 and be ready for the following season. I assume he'll be healthy enough to play. I don't know whether he's going to have the same level of athleticism. If he's anywhere near 100%, they're going to be good. That guy's a gamer. He's got a ton of experience. He has some good weapons, a solid offensive line. Their offense is going to be good again. Utah almost always plays good defense. They are physical up front. They have a great secondary, despite losing Clark Phillips. It's a good football team. They're ranked somewhere between 10 and 15 in most of the preseason polls. And that strikes me as about right. I think that's probably where they should be. This is a quality program. I bash the Bruins on here. I bash Oregon all the time. I'm not going to bash Utah. Not really. I am a little bit. But not so much because of what I think about their program. I think it's a solid program that's well coached and they do things right. That's all great. Here's my problem. Utah has been getting a little bit on my nerves recently. Now, part of that is the 2 losses last year, and I'm going to own that. If USC had beaten Utah last year, I wouldn't be listening to what they're saying right now and getting irritated by it. But USC didn't beat Utah last year. We'll talk about that in a minute. And so they are sort of irritating me because here's the thing. Utah is starting to think there's something that they're not. Utah is a good program. They're not a great program. I want you to listen to some of the things that Cam Rising had to say in the Pac-12 media day the other day. When asked about USC, in fairness, multiple times, Rising says, "It is what it is. They can think whatever they want. Just find out come this season." Okay, Cam, maybe we will find out this season, but does this mean you guys are actually going to win a road game against a good team? Because you never do. And I mean never do. Utah over the last 7 years, which is the best 7 years in Utah football history. They had that great game against Alabama in the Sugar Bowl, but I think that was like 15 years ago, before they came to the Pac-12. Utah is 3-13 over the last 7 years against good teams away from Rice-Eccles, and 2 of those 3 wins are actually neutral site games. So you're talking about a program that is night and day different when they're at home at Rice-Eccles in front of that crazy fan base and when they're actually on the road. And Cam, I don't know if you checked, but you're actually not playing USC in Salt Lake City this year. You're playing at the Coliseum. And here's the reality. Utah has trouble winning at the Coliseum. Utah couldn't beat Clay Helton at the Coliseum for the most part, not until that last year. Listen, 2015, a number 3 ranked Utah team against a Clay Helton-led USC team at the Coliseum, and Utah gets blown out. 2 years later, Utah again loses to Clay Helton at the Coliseum. 2 years after that, a top 10 Utah team goes to the Coliseum to face Clay Helton and a third-string quarterback and loses. The next year, 2020, Utah actually lost to Clay Helton at home. Look, if you're losing home games to Clay Helton, that's a problem. Now, what am I trying to say? Here's what I'm trying to say. You guys at home are a handful. You're kind of like Oregon, and to a lesser extent Notre Dame. Those are really tough venues, and if you're playing a good Utah team at Utah, you're going to have your hands full. But Utah against good teams on the road, it's 14 points worse than they are at home, maybe 17, just not the same team. If you can't beat Clay Helton at the Coliseum, you are not beating Lincoln Riley and Caleb Williams at the Coliseum. You're just not. Look, here's the thing. When you look at Utah, what you see is a team that's done a pretty good job rising to become one of the premier teams of the Pac-12. Now, I don't know that that's saying a whole lot these days, but you've done that and you've done it well. Congratulations. You deserve respect. You also consistently embarrass the Pac-12 anytime you play somebody from a real conference out of conference. I mean, look, last year, played Florida, loss. Florida was terrible last year. Played Penn State, lost. Year before that, played Ohio State, lost. You also lost to BYU and San Diego State. I don't know how you did that. Go back to 2019, Texas, lost. 2018, Northwestern, lost. Northwestern? 2017, West Virginia win. We have to go all the way back to 2017 to find Utah beating a major conference team on the road. You have to go back to 2015 not just on the road, anywhere. And you have to go back to 2015 when Utah beat Michigan to see Utah beat an elite program outside the conference. It's just not something you do. So part of this irritation that Utah feels when people are talking about other programs and they're talking about USC and Utah doesn't think it gets the respect it deserves, part of the problem is that Utah never beats anybody outside of the Pac-12. You just don't. You don't win on the road and you don't win non-conference. So it makes it tough for the rest of the country to respect you that much. Since Utah joined the Pac-12 in 2011, not a single real bowl win. You've won the Sun Bowl, you've won the Las Vegas Bowl, nonsense like that. You haven't won any real bowl games. That's going back to 2011. Utah's only had one top 10 finish. So here's the thing. I don't want to dog on Utah. I actually like Utah. I said it. I praised you guys at the beginning of this, and you're good, and you're going to be good this year. The problem is that you're not elite, and you don't win on the road, and you're not going to beat USC at the Coliseum. You're just not. You're just not. You don't have what it takes to win a game like that against a player like that, against a team coached the way this USC team is going to be coached by Lincoln Riley. Now, you guys are saying, we beat you twice last year. This is true. And yes, I'm irritated about that. I think every USC fan is. But part of the reason we're irritated about that is because we know that it's not that those wins aren't legitimate. They count. They're legit wins. You win, it goes in the record books as a win. The 2 W's count. I can't take that away from you. I'm not going to try. I will say this. With a healthy Caleb Williams last year, on drives, not drives where there's almost no time left at the end of half or the end of the game. I'm talking about just regular drives with Caleb Williams healthy. USC had the ball 11 times against Utah's defense last year and scored 8 touchdowns. You had no answer to Caleb Williams or the USC offense. He did whatever he wanted anytime he wanted. He marched up and down the field and scored touchdown practically every time he got the ball. Now, if USC has a healthy Caleb Williams, well, let's talk about both games because I think it's worth going. Game number 1, you guys at Utah barely avoid getting blown out on your home field. Remember, that's a 14-0 game. And Cam Rising throws a pick. And then that pick is taken away by just an egregious, horrific officiating call of the type that you only see in the Pac-12 and then in the original The Longest Yard. It's that level of nonsense. And if that roughing the quarterback call isn't made, it's 14-0. USC gets the ball back. They hadn't come close to being stopped yet. They probably punch it in as 21-0. even at home, even if you're a good football team, you realize how hard it is to come back from a 21-0 deficit against a team that scores almost every time they get the ball against you. You guys were a play from being blown out on your home field last year by a USC team that wasn't nearly as good as this one's going to be. You got another call later in the game that was just as horrific, maybe worse. The officials gave you 14 points at home, you won by 1. The win counts, of course it does. But let's not act like you guys didn't get some massive breaks against a much inferior USC team last year at home, because you did. Pac-12 championship game is the same way. Listen, now let's talk about what Cam Rising had to say. Because again, you guys almost got blown out in that game. Rising says, no, we just trusted the process. A lot of times you don't really worry about what's going on the other side. You have to focus on what you guys have going on. We just kind of felt that it started to shift before Caleb Williams' injury, he means. We kind of just felt that the ball was going our way. Then we started to get that momentum, kind of took it. That was just kind of part of it. Started to get the momentum. What are you talking about? It was 14-3 and USC was driving deep into your territory when Caleb Williams gets hurt. You guys didn't even hurt him. It was a non-contact injury. He pulls up lame when he was probably going to score a touchdown from 70 yards out. USC ends up having to settle for a field goal to keep it a 2-score game. If Caleb Williams doesn't get hurt, he jogs into the end zone. It's 21-3. And again, you guys are down 18 points against a team that has scored 8 touchdowns and 11 possessions against you. You can't stop them. You're not going to come back from that 18-point deficit. So again, you guys won. You won the Pac-12. You had the chance to represent the Pac-12 in the Rose Bowl and lose yet another non-conference game. That's great. But the truth is, you were unbelievably fortunate in both games last year. USC this year, much improved defensively, playing at the Coliseum. You're going to be lucky if you don't get run off the field. I'm going to make my call now. I think that's a 50-22 kind of game. I think you guys get an absolute beatdown. Now, I don't actually wish that on you otherwise. I'd love to see you beat Utah. I'd love to see you, win a bunch of other games. That's fine. And please, do beat Florida and Baylor. I don't want the Pac-12 to be embarrassed any more than they have to be. Go beat those teams. Go show that you can win on the road at Baylor. Go show that you can beat, decent non-conference teams, which you never do. All that's fine, but you're not winning at the Coliseum. That's a beatdown. So, Trojan fans, don't worry about Utah this year. I'm making the call. Utah this year is not a problem. They're one of the 5 big games, but I'm dealing with them first because I'm telling you it's going to be the easiest of the 5. USC is going to smack Utah. And Rising, I hope you're still healthy because I want you to take a beat down in that game, okay? All right, let's change topics just for a second. I want to talk a little bit about recruiting. USC fans are upset because USC lost out on 3 blue chip recruits this past week. I think the one that hurt most was Kingston Valama Osu from St. John Bosco. It's a position of need for USC. He's a local kid. He talked a lot about how he wants to be involved in real estate, live in Southern California, and all this stuff. It just sounded like it doesn't make any sense for him to go somewhere else. He went somewhere else. Fine. Here's the thing. First of all, this is still a top 10 class and maybe a top 5 class. We'll see what happens as between now and December. I think USC finishes somewhere around the top 5, which is great. All right. But a couple of things that we should also keep in mind. One is that recruiting has changed massively over the last few years with the transfer portal. It doesn't matter as much whether you get a player straight out of high school because you can pull somebody who's more established out of the portal a year or 2 later to fill any holes in your roster. You can do it, and Lincoln Riley has shown that he is a master at using the portal, and he will continue to be. He's probably not going to bring in 10, 12 starters a year the way he has the last couple of years because USC's roster is going to be too good to do that. But he's still going to pull guys out of the portal because as long as USC isn't dropping off big bags of money for high school recruits, they're going to lose some guys that they would otherwise get and would want, and they're going to have to replace those guys. So one of the things you need to remember is that the transfer portal makes it so that you can recover from these losses. There's never been any such thing as a can't miss recruit. They don't exist. in football. Football's not a sport where you pick up one guy and you can dominate. It's not like you're Indiana State, you get Larry Bird and you find yourself in the national title game. One guy doesn't do that on a football field. It just doesn't happen. Even a guy as great as Caleb Williams can't do it by himself. And so there's no such thing as a can't miss recruit, but USC is still doing well and they can still go into the transfer portal. But I also want you to think about something else. This is a point that I haven't seen made as often recently. And that is, it usually takes a few years to build up the recruiting machine. I want you to go back to Pete Carroll's time. Pete Carroll is obviously an unbelievable recruiter, one of the greats of the last 20 or 30 years, up there with Nick Saban and now Kirby Smart with Urban Meyer. Pete landed some classes. But it took him 3 recruiting classes to do that. His first year, his 2001 recruiting class, was ranked around number 20. He pulled in some big time guys, Matt Leinart, Sean Cody, Mike Patterson, but this was not a class loaded with blue chippers. He finished around number 20. His second recruiting class was better than that, but still, it wasn't to the level of his later classes. He was ranked about 12 or 13 in most of the recruiting rankings. Again, he landed some guys, Mike Williams, Darnell Bing, Winston Justice, some other key contributors. But even Pete's second class was not a monster class. It wasn't until his third class that after the 11-2 season and the win in the Orange Bowl against Iowa, that Pete started to recruit at the level that USC fans became accustomed to seeing him recruit. It was that 2003 class, one of the best recruiting classes of all time. You're talking about Reggie Bush, Lindell White, Ryan Khalil, Sam Baker, Lawrence Jackson, Steve Smith, and others. An unbelievable collection of talent. It took a few years to build up to that. Lincoln Riley is actually ahead of the game. He finished around number 10 in his first recruiting class. He's going to be around number 5 in this one. I think his third recruiting class is going to be a monster haul, and it's going to be up there with Alabama and Georgia and those classes. To do that, USC has to prove it on the defensive side of the ball this year, right? Lincoln Riley already has a reputation nationally as maybe the best offensive coach in the country. Guys know if you play in Lincoln Riley's offense, you're going to be coached well, you're going to be schemed up, you're going to be put in a position where you can excel. They don't yet know that defensively, and USC is going to have to prove it. I think USC is going to be much improved defensively this year. I think it's actually going to be a pretty good unit. Not a top 10 unit, but pretty good. I think this could be a top 25 defense. And if so, then I think you're going to see defensive players start to buy in the same way that offensive players do. But all this is just to say that that most coaches, when they take over a new program that had been struggling, it takes a little bit of time. Because these kids have been recruited for the last few years by these other programs that had been far more successful than USC was under son of O-line coach, and that doesn't switch overnight with some guys in some programs. So USC is going to be all right. This is going to be a good recruiting class. It's going to be a big season on the field. We may even see some flips for the Trojans if USC does what I think they're going to do in the fall. But don't worry about it. Recruiting's going okay. And Lincoln Riley will find a replacement for KVA and any of the other guys he misses out on this year. So don't worry about that. Okay, that's all for tonight. Thank you for joining me on Musings. I've got some interviews coming up. I can't tell you what they are yet because I'm still trying to nail them down. But I have some great interviews coming up, and we'll continue with our preview of the other 4 big games. We've got Washington and we have Washington to talk about. We'll do Washington next, and we'll talk about that. Anyway, thanks for joining. I'll see you next time. Fight on.